This is the Moonlight Graham Show, a freewheeling conversation with the role players, the underdogs, and guys with flat-out great stories in sports.
Welcome back to the Moonlight Baseball Hour, where me, your host, Tim Flattery, and Louis Flattery's dad, Neil, we sit down each and every week and we talk about baseball in the Moonlight Baseball Hour. This week, we're talking about the College World Series. Obviously, Neil, you and I, we've grown up in the state of Iowa. We've spent the large majority of our lives here. A summer pastime, if you're living in Iowa, is the College World Series that happens for 2 weeks in the middle of June each and every year. Where are you at this year with the College World Series?
You know, Tim, I've been following it a little bit, watching it here and there, like, you know, checking in on the results and to see how the teams are doing and that type of thing. I don't get the impression that I've been following it quite as closely as you have. I think it's one of those things, Tim, where I wish I was a bigger fan of college baseball. Like we've talked about before, like the style of play is really exciting. The environment is really exciting. All that stuff I'm into. But it's just one of those things where, like, growing up where Iowa State never had a baseball team to follow, like it never really was something we followed growing up a ton until, you know, you played college baseball, until Joey played college baseball, and we started being aware of it a little bit more. But I mean, I remember growing up, especially, you know, our Uncle Jim and Carol would always have tickets to the College World Series. So we went down to Rosenblatt Stadium a few times. Growing up, I've been to the new stadium a few times as well. So that was probably the extent of my college baseball experience growing up. But as it's grown over the last few years, I've paid more attention to it. And this year specifically, I've been following a little bit as well.
So here's the question I have for you, Neil. Obviously, the College World Series has been in Omaha for the past 72 years, I believe, since 1950. And it's a huge part. If you're from Iowa, if you're from Nebraska, you know people that have tickets. You make an annual pilgrimage over to Omaha to go to the College World Series, and they do an absolutely phenomenal job with the CWS over there. Like, so many bars, restaurants, the tailgating scene, all of that is built up around the new stadium since it's been open since 2011. And it's just a great environment. But my one question coming into today is, would college baseball and the sport of amateur baseball as a whole grow if maybe every 2 years or every year they rotated around where the College World Series was, similar to what we see with the Final Four, the NCAA National Championship football game, the Super Bowl? And would that allow other parts of the country to experience what we've been experiencing for the past 72 years here in the Midwest?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is yes. But at the same time, I think it would be really risky for college baseball to do that, just because the more I think about it, it's such an institution over there in Omaha. Like, you know, growing up, like I said, you may not even be a college baseball fan, but if you grow up anywhere in the vicinity of Omaha, it's part of your summer, every summer, where businesses are sponsoring it. There's a tailgating scene, all that type of thing. If you grow up anywhere in that area, chances are, if you're not going to the actual stadium to watch the games, you're going downtown to hang out with everyone else, you know, as part of that, just to be a part of the experience. And so, you know, you could run into issues there where if you move it, you might have instances where it's not quite as big, or cities aren't as prepared to host it, or the fan base, the population isn't excited to support it like they do in Omaha. But, you know, like we've kind of talked about before, I don't get the impression that Nebraska is really like the mecca of college baseball. I was going to say like it has been in the past, but I don't even know if it ever has really been the mecca of college baseball. They've really done a great job hosting it over the years, but it's not like Nebraska is a perennial powerhouse. They're not making the tournament or the College World Series every year. Creighton's only made it once. Nebraska, I think, has only made it 3 times, which surprised me because I know growing up, you heard about at least me when I was growing up in elementary school, I heard about those good Nebraska teams with Brett Jensen from Eagle Grove, and then like Darren Erstad and Alex Gordon and those type of guys. So I just had the impression that Nebraska was like this powerhouse in baseball, but they've only really made it the College World Series 3 times. They've only won one College World Series game. Creighton has only made it once, but they actually have more College World Series wins than Nebraska. So it's just kind of a long-winded way of saying that Nebraska is not really the mecca of college baseball, and there may be some areas that have may I don't want to say support it better, but they may be have more passionate college baseball fans there.
So are you saying like the risk for college baseball would be if they were to have it somewhere else in a given year, like let's say they have it in Nashville or Charlotte, somewhere like that, that city wouldn't come out and support the College World Series in the same way that Omaha has proven that it does for the last 70 years?
I don't know if those two instances would really that would be an example. Like Charlotte and Nashville, I think those would be home runs to host it. But if you were to venture up to like Minneapolis or Ann Arbor or somewhere where college baseball may not be one of the top sports, I don't know. I feel like the risk would be it may not be a huge draw. Like if you go to Nashville and Charlotte, I get the impression that college baseball is a lot bigger there already, where, you know, if you're looking to grow college baseball, those aren't really like spots where you need to be fishing for fans, you know?
I wonder, out of the fans, you know, there's 24,000 fans at Charles Schwab Stadium in Omaha, and that place is full almost every night. I wonder how many of those fans are, you know, locals, whether they're in Omaha or within maybe 100-mile radius, they're driving in for the game. And I wonder how many are flying in and they're Ole Miss fans, or their alma mater is in the World Series, so they typically wouldn't be there, but they are for that year. And, you know, is it 90% local and that's why it has to stay in Omaha? Or is Ole Miss, is Arkansas, is Stanford being so far away, bringing in 5,000 people? I don't know the answer to that, but I know traditionally, like Texas and LSU have always been the big fan bases that will travel to Omaha. But I'm curious as to what other ones, you know, travel. I bet, you know, Oklahoma seems to have a really good fan base. Notre Dame showed out a little well. A&M was okay this year. But maybe that's the piece, is that there's 20,000 Iowans and Nebraskans that fill that stadium every night, regardless of who's playing.
Yeah, I don't know. It leads me to believe just the fact that it does fill out, even for these games that, you know, don't have fan bases that are really passionate about college baseball. Just the fact that the stadium is filling out for those teams too leads me to believe that, you know, thinking that a lot of those tickets are a lot of local people showing up to the game. But yeah, I'd like to know the answer to that as well.
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm not advocating for them to leave Omaha. I think they're doing a great job over there. They have like a 25-year extension on the agreement, so it's not going anywhere. But it did strike me as like a question to be asked. One thing that I will gripe about Charles Schwab Stadium is, and I didn't notice this when I'm watching the College World Series, but I did notice it when I was watching the Big Ten tournament, which was also in that stadium this year. There's way too much foul ground in this stadium. And I don't know what they were thinking, but they need to bring in the fans on the first and third base sides. The fans are way too far away from the field. It looks like Oakland Coliseum there. And so it's a great stadium from a visual standpoint. And then when you see how many balls are caught in foul territory, it's like, wait a minute, this isn't right. And I think it would be a even more fun environment with the fans even closer to the action.
Yeah, I agree, Tim. And, you know, I think one of the points too that gets brought up a lot is just it's not quite the same environment that Rosenblatt was, you know, 12, 15 years ago, however long it moved to the new stadium. But like I said, I've been there a couple times too at the new stadium. It's still a great facility and that sort of thing. But I do think you kind of miss some of the atmosphere that you had at Rosenblatt as well.
I remember I saw the first ever game in the new stadium. It was Vanderbilt versus Virginia, I think. And George W. Bush came out and he threw out the first pitch and I cried. I had probably about 7 beers in me at the time, you know, and I remember Tanner Utley and I think Ryan Kem, we were on first base side, and I was just overcome with the montage that they just played on the big screen, and then W comes out and pumps a strike in, and I was in tears.
Was Tanner Utley crying too?
I'm sure Tanner was crying. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was actually kind of excited about this year's College World Series field, because when you look at the field, it was actually 3 teams that were in the Big 12 when Joey was in the Big 12. So it was like a great year based on teams that traditionally we always cheer for the Big 12, Neil, right? So like A&M, Texas, Oklahoma, they all make it. But it's also bittersweet because A&M is no longer in the Big 12. Now they are in the SEC. And Texas and OU are also leaving the Big 12 and going to the SEC. So technically, you had like 6 out of the 8 teams here will be in the SEC within the next couple of years. A&M, Texas, OU, Auburn, Ole Miss, Arkansas. And then the only outliers were Stanford in Northern California. And then essentially the other northern school was Notre Dame. So you have these 2 like premier academic private institutions, Notre Dame and Stanford. And then the other 6 are essentially just the SEC.
Yeah. Yeah, shoot, that is too bad. I didn't realize, one of the things I was looking into going into this too, not to change the subject, but I was looking to see, who has the most College World Series wins over time, like, and just expecting it to be just dominated by SEC schools. What I found was there's only, out of the top 10 schools with the most College World Series wins, there's only one SEC school on the list.
USC?
USC's number 1.
Yeah.
And Texas, I think, is tied for number
SEC.
2.
I was thinking
SEC school. LSU is the only one out of the top 10, which surprised me now because you look at like you said, this year's field is basically all SEC schools, or at least future SEC schools.
So it's LSU. I was shocked to hear that Ole Miss was this is their only time ever in the final.
That does surprise me. Ole Miss. Yeah, especially it just seems like maybe it's almost more of a recent phenomenon where these SEC schools are really, I mean, they've always been good, don't get me wrong, but it's really been a recent phenomenon where they're really pumping money into baseball specifically. Like, you look at this list, it's a lot of, you got appearances for titles. You got USC, Texas, LSU, Arizona State, Miami, Arizona, Cal State Fullerton, Oregon State, and Minnesota are your top 10 most titles.
Wow. I'm surprised Mississippi State isn't in there for wins, but maybe it's the titles, because Mississippi State was good for 40 years straight. But to your point, the ACC has always been really good too. Like Florida State, North Carolina, Miami, those are 3 powerhouses that seem to be there every year. Now that you bring up like Fullerton, Cal State, Irvine, and Fullerton, I'm surprised we haven't seen them there in a couple of years.
Yeah, they haven't been there since 2017. A lot of Pac-12 schools too, which I guess makes sense because California just has a ton of baseball over there as well. But yeah, I mean, I'd expect this list is going to probably become more SEC heavy going forward, but at least now it's kind of surprising how few there are.
So one thing I really like about college baseball as I'm watching it is that when you watch the monotony of 162 MLB games throughout the season, which I'm actually all for it, but I know not everybody likes watching baseball every night. But when you turn on the College World Series, you just get a lot more variability in the game. Part of that is because these guys are playing do or die baseball. It's not just another game for first or second place in a division in the middle of the summer. This is like their lives are on the line. So with that being said, there's a lot more pressure. So what I love about it is you have 19-year-old kids that are totally crumbling under the pressure of the College World Series. And I don't know how many times over the past couple of days I've seen just a pitcher not be able to get out of an inning, right? Like he's a starting pitcher and he goes 1 1/3, or he gets pulled after 1 out. So there's just so much on the line, and it's kind of fun. I'm not advocating to watch people melt down, but it's kind of fun to watch somebody crater to the pressure and have this all-American type of guy that all of a sudden just the nerves of the College World Series hit him and he can't get out of the first inning. That's fun to watch.
Yeah, I agree, Tim. And it's one of those, I think it's fun to just watch different types of baseball too, specifically where, in MLB, I watch the Twins, almost every night. But these guys in the majors are just they're so polished. They're playing day in and day out, so they don't hardly make any mistakes. But it's nice to be able to watch high level baseball, which college baseball is. But these guys are still, you still have guys that are playing that, they may never play professional baseball at all, but they're still really good players, but they may make mistakes, which adds a little more drama, a little more action to the game. They're not, they don't have perfect, senses at the plate for balls and strikes. So they're not walking or just hitting home runs, like kind of what the game has turned into at the major league level. So there's a little more action, that type of thing, which I really appreciate.
That's a good point. You see way more chasing pitches. Like guys are striking out on pitches outside of the strike zone all over the place. And you just don't see that in the major leagues. Nobody swings at any pitches outside of the strike zone. And in college baseball, guys are swinging at everything.
Yeah. Yeah. In the majors, it's these guys at the majors have such great command where if you can't get strike a guy out with throwing, while throwing strikes, then you're just not going to be a effective major league pitcher. But in college game, I feel like you can get away with throwing balls off the plate to get guys to chase a little bit.
Yeah, and to your point, the ball's put in play more, and guys are making errors too. So like there's more action, and then there's more stuff that just goes wrong. And I'm not advocating for errors here, but it is kind of fun to see a ball get thrown away because you hardly see mistakes in the major leagues. And it's fun to see that in the College World Series. It provides for just better games because no team is ever out of it. Like anything can happen. A big rally can happen just like that. So I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah. And you brought up earlier, like just the variability in the game too, in the college game. Like I was kind of going through like what the stats look like for some of these college teams where like, you have some hitters on these teams who are kind of like their batting averages. I know batting average is kind of like derided as not like the most effective way to value hitters anymore, but I still like it. But you have a couple guys that are kind of like almost pushing 400 batting average, like this Ivan Melendez for Texas, who was playing in the College World Series, and this Jack Moss for Arkansas are both batting over 380. But then you have Ole Miss, who had a third baseman that they started who was batting 167. So you just have like this huge spread in batting averages where you would never see that hardly. I know batting average just kind of dipped, but you hardly see a guy bat over 330 in the majors anymore. And you hardly ever see a guy bat under 200. Where like, because there's that variability, I think it makes more sense for teams to play like the small ball game that you don't see a lot in the majors anymore, where like bunting and stealing and like suicide squeezes, which you mentioned, you saw, there's been some instances of that this year in this College World Series as well.
Did you see the Ole Miss coach come to the mound and start chewing ass the other night?
Yeah, so, which I liked.
It's fun to see a baseball coach chew somebody out. Like we're so used to managers that have been neutered and they no longer can say anything to players or else they'll get fired. And this guy, Bianco for Ole Miss, who's really great coach, well-respected, comes out and is just laying into guys. And it was all positive. It wasn't negative. The guys were locked in. They all responded to it. And it was just a good example of like, oh, that's right. We can get chewed out on the baseball field too.
Yeah, I know. I did appreciate that too, because it's funny. Yeah, because when you watch so much Major League Baseball, you never see that on a Major League team. And these guys in college, I mean, they're more coaches in the vein of like a high school coach. And I know like these Major League managers are maybe more coaches than we kind of give them credit for. But yeah, it was kind of refreshing to see that.
Well, yeah. So we got OU and we got Ole Miss in the finals here. Traditionally, I would cheer for the Big 12, but I'm a little bit torn here because we got Iowa representation here on Ole Miss. We got Mike Clement, who is the hitting coach and the third base coach for Ole Miss. Mike Clement was also the hitting coach down at K-State when Joey played there and they made the super regional. Clement, of course, from Marshalltown. And then Calvin Harris, who was a catcher from Dubuque, who's now kind of playing all over the field for Ole Miss, hit a home run the other night, had 3 hits the other night. It's fun to see an Iowan go down to Ole Miss, play for Mike Clement, and do really well. So I've got a soft spot for Ole Miss, but it's still hard for me to cheer for the SEC.
Yeah, that's tough. I don't know. I'd probably still cheer for Oklahoma, but yeah, with those Iowa connections, that is kind of tempting. One of the things, it is kind of almost bittersweet though, because you'd wonder if Iowa still had 3 Division I schools that had baseball in the state, would these guys be leaving for Ole Miss? I mean, you probably, if you get a call from Ole Miss, you're probably still going to Ole Miss, but you wonder if it's almost a function of us not having much baseball in the state anymore.
Right. If Mike Clement's the head coach at Iowa State and he makes that same recruiting pitch to Calvin Harris, does he end up at Iowa State?
Right. Yeah. I mean, maybe not, but yeah, it's just kind of a shame. It is one of the reasons why, I know Heller's done a great job at Iowa too, but it's almost like if only one Division I school in the state, the expectation should be a little higher now for these teams to be better.
Well, the thing that's killed Iowa is that they played in the Big Ten, and the Big Ten's RPI this year was just terrible. Like, Iowa had a great year. They won over 30 games. They probably should have been in the NCAA tournament, but just the conference ranking of Iowa or of the Big Ten was so bad. That's where the benefit of the Big 12 is. And if you're playing with Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, Texas, like these are powerhouse baseball teams, and all of a sudden you get a good coach in there and you finish in the top half of that league, you're playing in the NCAA tournament. That's just the reality. In the Big Ten, you essentially have to win the Big Ten. Rutgers won over 40 games and didn't make the NCAA tournament this year. It's just crazy.
Yeah,
so
and
that's why it's such a shame that Iowa State doesn't have a program. And I would say that to Jamie Pollard's face.
Is there any chance that they get a program? Like,
I think
in the next, I almost wonder if with the NIL stuff and if maybe football becoming almost like a quasi-professional sport, if we can get to a point where like we can kind of exclude football, which maybe how it should have been handled before, but I won't get into that, but almost exclude football and basketball to some extent from like the rest of these like other non-revenue producing sports. If we can get to that point and then we can kind of find a way to make room for baseball in the future. I don't know.
I don't think it would ever happen under Pollard. I think you got to remember Pollard came from Wisconsin, and Wisconsin doesn't have a baseball program either. I think the only way it happens is if, Tim Flattery wins the lottery and all of a sudden I have $100 million to blow and I just force Iowa State's hand to do what I say. That's the only way. Like if it's going to take almost 9 figures to make that happen, but money talks. It would have to be one big donor or a team of big donors, not just like, oh, we got 10 million together. It's like, I think it has to be north of 50 million to finance that program, to build the new stadium, to do all the stuff that they would need to do to compete at the Big 12 level. And, Pollard's shown he's willing to raise $15 million for the women's cross country team. No questions asked, but just he scoffs at the fact when anyone brings up baseball.
Yeah. $15 million for the women's cross country team. Well,
I say that in jest because, the way they do it at Iowa State, where they essentially combine Iowa State track and field for both men's and women's, but it's, so they raised $15 million for the 4 track and cross country teams there. But like what it's done, it's Iowa State's got an amazing cross country program, and they got actually Iowa's got a better track program than Iowa State does, but Iowa State has a great cross country program. But, it costs $15 million of an investment to get that, and no one cares. And there's 10 guys on the team, and none of them are even local.
Yeah, I mean, that was always the dig on Iowa State when I was at Iowa, was that, yeah, sure, they have a lot of good distance runners, but, they're not local Midwestern guys that are coming to Iowa State. They're, but anyways, that's not that big of a deal. But I mean, one thing about Iowa State too is like there's just not that many sports. Like for men's sports, you have wrestling, football, basketball, track. Is that it? You have 4 sports: wrestling, football, basketball, track, and golf. And golf, I guess. Whereas Iowa probably almost has twice that many sports. But that's probably a function of being in the Big Ten where there's maybe more money. I don't know.
What other men's sports does Iowa have? Baseball.
They have baseball. Well, they got rid of swimming. They have
Do they have tennis?
They have tennis.
Men's tennis?
Men's tennis, yeah. They have gymnastics.
Oh, okay.
They have men's gymnastics. Anyways, I think there's another one.
Neil, this is a bad topic to get on because it's the 50th anniversary of Title IX. And so we'll get into some hot water here if we continue on this track.
Okay. Well, yeah, I'll quit talking. I don't have anything really great to say. I really don't.
All right. Well, man, what a Moonlight Baseball hour this week.
Yeah, I know. It's been kind of a wake-up call these last couple of weeks when I've been listening to Part of My Take and they suspended Billy for not putting the work in. And I was like, I don't really want to be the Billy football of the Moonlight Graham show. So I'm going to start putting more work in.
Yeah, we'll be better next week. Have a great weekend, Moonlighters.
It's Moonlight Graham, yeah. It's a pretty good program, broadcasting to the heartland. Sports stories for the everyman. It's Moonlight Graham, yeah. Please follow us on Instagram. You're loving us on Twitter too. You download every pod we do. It's Moonlight Graham.